God Gave Rock and Roll to You was the moment when it all came together for Argent.
Some of it sounds really as if it could have been recorded 5 years ago, and yet it was 30 years ago, which is extraordinary.
It's such a shame when it comes to great British progressive rock that Argent get left out of the frame somewhere. They deserve to be in there.
Calling it a day in 1975 was probably, in retrospect, a good idea. One problem Argent had was that they were following on in the wake of people like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They weren't in the first wave of progressive music, so perhaps people regarded them as followers rather than innovators. Certainly Rod Argent had the talent to be an innovator, he proved that with the Zombies, but when they were at their pomp, perhaps the time for progressive music was ticking away and the punk era was on the horizon, so he didn't really have long to do what he did.
God Gave Rock and Roll for You, I think certainly is Argent's finest moment, and it encapsulates what the band could have been. God gave rock and roll to you, gave rock and roll to you, put it in the soul of everyone. God gave rock and roll to you, gave rock and roll to you.
The first Argent album, recorded in 1969, called Argent, recorded for CBS Epic Records, was a strong indication of how far the band could go and where they would go, partly because, of course, that Rod Argent, the keyboard player, and Chris White had been in the Zombies, so they'd already recorded and toured, so they knew the score, basically.
Chris White didn't want to be in the band. He was happy being in the background as a co-writer with Argent and also as a producer. Argent got in his older cousin Jim Rodford on bass, and then they went out to find the two missing links. They found it in a drummer called Bob Henrit and a young guitarist called Russ Ballard, who were in a band called Unit 4+2. Strangely enough, although Ballard was brought into Unit 4+2 to heavy up the sound, he was more of a pop-style songwriter. So he had this dichotomy. Russ Ballard, heavy guitarist, wannabe pop writer. Rod Argent, from a successful pop group, wanted to be a serious and heavy musician. And the diversion and dichotomy worked rather well on their first album, which was just called Argent, because she had both sides complementing each other quite nicely.
Musically, it certainly had a lot of throwbacks to the Zombies style, particularly in vocal harmonies. That was what made the Zombies particularly noteworthy, and it was something he was determined to carry on with Argent, but just possibly expanding the instrumental side to give more room for virtuosity. Plenty of keyboard solos, and with the guitarist Russ Ballard giving him room to stretch out too.
When the band was put together, they knew what they wanted. And in many ways, it never really deviated from that original concept. It was just, they produced better tracks and more interesting tracks and, you know, maybe brought some other influences into the music.
In terms of vindicating how far the band could go, Argent by Argent wasn't really a major indicator. It was more of a halfway house between the pop of the Zombies and the heavier progressive rock that would bring Argent their greatest rewards. Argent's musical hallmarks, if you can identify them, would certainly be a classical, jazz and possibly soul bent coming from Rod Argent himself, but also a more commercial American R&B style from the Russ Ballard side of things. You certainly would find that when these worked together, Argent were at their best.
Argent were a classically British band. Their music came, strangely enough, from the British pop scene of the 1960s, clearly because of Rod Argent's connection with the Zombies, one of the most successful bands of that period. So they were rooted in that tradition. But they also had the classical elements which Rod Argent brought, and church style elements as well, which again came from Rod Argent's fascination with the church organ.
The extraordinary thing about Argent was, I think it was a British sound, but it was one of the few British bands of that era that really grooved more like an American band. A lot of their influences, obviously what they'd listened to and what they were trying to emulate, were either the black American music of the blues and the jazz, or some of the American bands that were around at that time.
In a way, they were more British than any other progressive rock band, because the likes of Yes and Genesis weren't so British that they were locked into British roots. And again, some of Argent's influences were folk, British folk music. So he brought all this to bear in a classically and typically British sound. And it was enhanced by the fact that he had a man in Russ Ballard who understood British pop better than most, possibly subconsciously more than consciously, but he certainly understood it. And it all added together to a band who could have gone on to greatness if only they had realised what they had to offer. Stepping Stone worked quite well musically because it had that heaviness. It had the Rod Argent keyboard motif, which was very much the style and sound of Argent, more than anything else. And it really enhanced it more than most songs did in that early part of their career. It was progressive in the fact that it sounded like a serious piece of music, but it still had melody. And it brought together those two parts of what Argent were to be about better than most of the material they were to go on to record.
It's a 4-minute song, quite progressive, plenty of room for jazzy keyboards and a guitar solo. Not something that would particularly make the charts, but then Rod Argent had been in the charts with the Zombies. He was looking for a different kind of credibility this time.
When progressive rock works well, as it did in the hands of Genesis or Yes, there's nothing to touch it, but occasionally, while a band was making a conscious effort to go in that direction, it did come unstuck. And I'm afraid that's, to an extent, what this piece illustrates for us. It's not a great composition, it's too contrived, and it's trying too hard to be a progressive song.
Stepping Stone, like a lot of tracks on Argent by Argent, could have been a Zombies song. But what Rod Argent did was he separated out the parts of it, gave more room for solos, basically showing off what musicians Argent were. Whereas the Zombies had put everything into making a song a commercial success, Argent were really appealing for the audience that appreciated musicianship.
Lyrically, Stepping Stone didn't say much. That wasn't ever the forte with Argent. Russ Ballard was quite a good lyricist, but what he was good at was involving melody with words, but he wasn't telling stories that particularly stood out. And again, Rod Argent and Chris White weren't particularly great as lyricists. They were better with the music. So there wasn't anything particularly lyrically about Stepping Stone or much of the material from Argent, at least at that point, that really made you feel they're telling us something as a statement, we really should listen.
Although Stepping Stone doesn't really work as a piece because it's really trying too hard, there are a lot of quirky time signatures and technically quite difficult stuff. And Bob handles that with great aplomb. So he's a very accomplished drummer, very, very proficient, but really he never got the chance to show what he could do because the material, certainly in the first 2 or 3 albums, was sadly a bit limited.
He could deal with the heavier rock, he could deal with the jazz side of things that Argent would put in his compositions. He could cover all the bases that he was regularly asked to. But in many ways, he had to wait until he got on stage before he could really cut loose. That's where he and Jim Rodford, who incidentally is Rod Argent's cousin, could really go to town, providing the solid foundation for Russ Ballard and Rod to take off and give us a few pyrotechnics.
He has a very, very good feel as a drummer. He's a very solid timekeeper, which is really important. He's not too flash as a drummer yet. He's got the right sort of floweriness and technique that's required, and yet he's nice and solid. He plays the songs, which personally to me is the most important thing a drummer can do. Not only do they have to keep time, keep the tempo solid, but play the songs.
He was a very heavy drummer, a very powerful drummer, slightly flamboyant, which is exactly what Rod Argent wanted. Rod Argent didn't want a safe drummer, someone to keep the beat. He wanted someone who could extemporize around what he was doing, to improvise. And that was what Argent were really about. That's what they wanted, to be a progressive band who could go on stage, take a 4-minute song and make it into a 44-minute song, because the musicianship was there. And Henrit could do that. He was a tremendously powerful, aggressive drummer who also was more of a percussionist, which all the great progressive drummers were. You think of Bill Bruford, you think of Alan White, you think of Phil Collins, you think of Carl Palmer. They're not drummers in a natural sense. They're percussionists, and that's a big difference. And I think what happened with Henrit was he started to focus on one part of his style and talent, i.e. the heaviness. And when Argent finally split up, for a brief time he ran a drum shop before joining the Kinks with Jim Rodford on bass. And they've locked into a formidable rhythm section who's still there today with the Kinks, which shows how much talent this guy has.
Both Russ and Chris and Rod all had good lyrical ideas. They weren't, some bands have great musical ideas and great melody ideas, but their lyrics aren't too good. But their lyrics were always good as well. They were strong ideas that would give you sort of visuals. And even today, they weren't sort of particularly trippy hippie that some of the bands from that era were, and they still make sense today.
Argent may have been named after the keyboard player, but the man with the guitar, sang half of the lead vocals and wore the sunglasses was Russ Ballard. He came from a background with Adam Faith and the Roulettes, but his major problem was getting enough songs onto an album. Liar suggested to me that he should really have got more.
It was a blues-based, sort of country-ish, and the sort of that Delta blues feel to it that Ballard brought to the band. He had that really good soulful voice, so he could actually put that across genuinely. It wasn't a false way of singing.
It was a typical Russ Ballard style. Russ Ballard's one of the greatest pop rock songwriters of all time because he understands melody and also the 3-minute format. Get in, get out, have a chorus, have a verse, and make everything stick in the mind. And Liar was the first particular example that hit the national consciousness. That's why it started to get attention on the lower part of the charts as an Argent single, because people understood there was a melody there. And Ballard was opening himself up and saying, I'm a songwriter, I want to be a songwriter in this band, I'm not going to just sit back and be a guitarist or a singer. And it worked brilliantly in a way because of that.
It was very much a hit from the first introduction onwards, and Three Dog Night actually covered it and had a major American hit with it.
Partly because I suspect they understood what that song was all about better than Argent did. Argent were trying to be a serious band, the charts didn't exist. Three Dog Night took it and made it chart friendly.
It's based around, as I said, a sort of Delta blues feel, which is this riff here, which is in G minor. That sort of drone effect. It's also, the G minor is the relative minor to B flat major, so it's a pentatonic scale as well they're using, which is the blues scale basically. So it's playing around that droning riff, and and it goes up to a D minor chord, to a C major chord, which is a little bridge. And then the chorus is quite unusual because it plays the riff and then goes into a syncopated chorus.
It's no surprise it was a hit in the States because it's an excellent piece, and it illustrates where the band could have gone had they used more of Russ Ballard, because at this stage Rod Argent had kind of lost his way as a composer. There had been some very good work with the Zombies, and people were expecting big things of Argent, but it really didn't happen on the first two albums, and you can see in the early TV shows that the band hadn't quite established the direction they would later do.
Turn me away, hanging on every word, believing the things I heard, being a fool. You've taken my life, so take my soul. That's what you said, but I believed it all. I wanna be with you, long as you want me to, I won't move away.
Russ Ballard and Rod Argent were both songwriters fighting for the same space. It set up a kind of creative tension that I know Rod enjoyed. He certainly felt that Russ brought something to the band that he himself didn't have. It would mean, however, that Russ would leave before the end of the band's natural lifespan and go off and become a songwriter, and a very successful one, writing hits for people like America.
He was the best songwriter in the band. In fact, he wasn't just the best songwriter in Argent, he was the best songwriter around, or one of the best around. And that's been proven. Here we are in 2004, and Russ Ballard is still writing great songs. In fact, he's written great songs throughout his career, and he's known as one of the great songwriters. He's up there with the very best. And certainly in the 1980s, I remember a band called Magnum, who were having a lot of success in the UK, and their record label, Polydor, said, look, you write a lot of good songs, what we'd like you to do is to work with Russ Ballard, because this man turns good songs into hits. So he had that reputation.
Russ Ballard, of course, wrote the all-time classic, which is God Gave Rock and Roll to You, and some of the stronger songs. So I think the band could have relied more on Russ as a writer. Also a very, very underrated guitarist, great guitarist.
The problem is, Russ Ballard himself would very much be liked as an artist. He would like respect as a man who sings and plays guitar as much as being a songwriter. He's never had that. I remember talking to him once and he said, you know what, I'd give up all those hits I've written that other people have actually made into successful chart hitters for one hit of my own. Just to have one song I record and has chart potential, but never happens. Other people do it.
I walk the streets that I used to see, so bad no trouble would bother me. They're so bad, they're so bad.
Ring of Hands was an improvement on the first album, but then again, the first album wasn't that great. I mean, the band had really yet to find a good, solid direction, and although things were improving, there was still a really long way to go before this band would produce some of the classic work that they ultimately delivered.
I think on the second record they were starting to be able to, as I said, find their feet, and so they were able to extend songs a little bit, not be scared to do that, longer solos, be a little bit more experimental. But the great thing about Argent was when they were experimental, they didn't, you know, bore the pants off the listener. It was experimental, but it was, you could engage with that experimentation and it wouldn't sort of lose you. You know, you wouldn't drift off to another place listening to them.
They didn't progress in the sense of moving forward rather than progressive rock. The main reason being there was a growing dichotomy between the two songwriting teams in the band. Rod Argent and Chris White were getting heavy and getting progressive. Russ Ballard, the other songwriter, was moving far more towards the mainstream. His songs becoming more pop-oriented. And the split within the band was starting to show as early as that second album. So it didn't work as well as that first one.
Many musicians can't bear to listen to their own music. But when Rod Argent goes back to Ring of Hands, as he's told me, it is one album that he can listen to and really enjoy. Probably not surprising, because it was an album that moved more towards the style that brought Argent the greatest success, but also had a pop sensibility that I think Rod appreciated.
My feeling is the first one certainly had the potential to show where the band was going, but they never got there because the split was never healed. And maybe it's an indictment of Rod Argent as a band leader, that he couldn't actually take Russ Ballard and involve him more in the songs that he was writing and persuade Russ to actually get more, to have him more involved with the songs that were coming out from the ballad side. But the split got wider and wider, and at this point really it was so obvious Ring of Hands didn't work.
Sweet Mary is a straightforward blues number, and for me it's a complete waste of time and talent, really. In this band there was so much ability. You had a fantastic songwriter in Russ Ballard, and clearly Rod Argent had some great musical ideas that were going to coalesce at some stage and produce some special work, but this is just tired, ordinary blues, and unfortunately it's the kind of thing that Argent had a habit of presenting. When they had the opportunity to really show off and showcase just what the band would do, suddenly we switched to this tired blues formula that thousands of people can do better, and not everyone could do what Argent did.
Had a lot of hookability about it. This could be the hit Argent needed. However, dear old Argent hit a problem. Sweet Mary was interpreted by a lot of radio stations in America as being a drug reference. I'm not quite sure why, but that's the way it was interpreted. I think somebody started the rumour, it got out of control, and before you know it, an awful lot of radio stations in America were saying, we're not playing this. So it was pulled as a single. Had it been allowed to go out there and got the full support it deserved, it probably would have been a hit single, and who knows, maybe things might have changed for the band.
It's interesting that when it was released as a single in the States, it actually got banned from radio because there was a line about taking us higher. I don't think that's what was actually intended when it was written. Certainly the musical content is very jazzy, it's got soul-style backing vocals, which a lot of the Zombies' early material did. Again, a little bit of a halfway house between the Zombies' catchy tunes and the heavy metal powerhouse that Argent were to become.
The thing is, with Argent, no song is typical of theirs, and every song is typical of theirs, because they were always very focused on what they did. And maybe this is to do with the fact that, I don't know about this, but maybe when they put material out, they'd gone through, when you got maybe 10 tracks on an album, they'd gone through 20, they'd recorded 20, and they'd honed it down to the best material that they had. But they had no shortage of good material. So in a sense that, you know, typical, as I say, every Argent song is typical of Argent in a sense, because you know, so many variants really.
Rejoice is the sort of song that Rod Argent left the Zombies to do. It was a lovely vehicle for his keyboard playing, which had a very good organic and organ feel, and also his voice, which was never particularly strong. But what Rejoice had was a framework within which his voice could sound very strong. So in a way, it's one of the best songs that Argent as a band ever communicated to an audience, because it represented where Rod Argent wanted to go. And let's face it, at the end of the day, he was the leader of the band.
I like their use of the Baroque sound, and this is one of these pieces where we do get some nice keyboard playing from Rod Argent in that lovely Baroque style that he didn't use a great amount of, but when he did, I always find it hugely satisfying.
Not only did it have, it was a vehicle for his voice, but it was also typical of Argent's songs in the sense of there's a little bit of that and a little bit of that style, and they would manage to fuse them together, and it was always very fluid.
If you listen to Rejoice, it's not too difficult to be transported back to church. We're not talking about soul or gospel here, but Rod Argent's training, which certainly had a lot to do with choral and church music. And you certainly hear it with Rejoice, which is probably suitable given the title of the song. It's something that typified Argent's writing and playing, possibly lacking the sort of commercial chorus that Russ Ballard would have given it. But in terms of a progressive rock track of the early 70s, you'd certainly find a lot worse.
Rejoice lyrically didn't really say much apart from the fact it was trying to be quasi-religious in a rock and roll sense. And like many songs of that nature, lyrically it falls down a little flat because the lyrics are slightly crass. But again, it introduces the fact that Rod Argent wanted to be a serious musician. He wanted his lyrics to have the hymnal feel. He wanted a William Blake type feel, if you want. He wanted to do something that Emerson, Lake and Palmer were to do when they covered Jerusalem. He wanted a statement that would be pretentious, if you will. Unfortunately, lyrically, it doesn't really stand up particularly well because the words are a little bit mundane.
In terms of great keyboard players of British rock, I would certainly rate Rod Argent up alongside the Emersons and the Lords, and the Wakemans, which is interesting because one of the bands that influenced Rod to form Argent was the early Yes. I remember him telling me that he saw Yes first supporting Janis Joplin at the Royal Albert Hall. Very impressed with them, although I think at that point Rick Wakeman had yet to join them. But it was that kind of progressive rock with the high harmonies that he was interested in reproducing. Obviously his keyboard skills meant that you got a keyboard solo here and there, but I don't think displaying his virtuosity was his main point.
He brings a lot of style, a lot of energy, some great melodic ideas as the band developed. Probably held back by the fact that the first 2 or 3 albums weren't that coherent. There wasn't a great wealth of material on there. But when the band finally got into its stride, Rod did actually emerge as one of the leading lights as a keyboard player, but sadly very underrated even to this day.
Rod Argent is a keyboard player within the keyboard fraternity and within the progressive rock fraternity has his place in history. He's hugely respected. In fact, little known, when Rick Wakeman first quit Yes back in 1974, the man whom Yes wanted in the band was Rod Argent. He turned them down because he felt his band was still very much a workable unit and was going forward. With hindsight, Argent himself said, I made a mistake, because at that point Russ Ballard had left Argent and Argent weren't really going anywhere. If only he'd seen that and joined Yes, who knows? But that's the point. The point is, he is regarded by musicians as being up there with the very best, and to be honest, he deserves to be.
What he musically did in that particular era, if you listen to it again, fantastic playing, some of his introductions live and his solos and stuff, yeah, definitely up there. Very, very masterful musician, great technique, subtlety, dynamics, didn't overplay, you know, all the hallmarks of a good musician. So in many ways, he's sort of overlooked. He didn't become quite so famous as an organ player, but maybe that's because he had lots of different attributes. He was a songwriter, producer, singer, you know, all sorts of different things.
His work, firstly with the Zombies, a pop band, yet allowing his own musicianship to come through, is exemplary. And even though Argent's career was very patchy, Argent the band that is, he still had his moments of wonderful inspiration, and he still come back to Hold Your Head Up. And his organ solo is brilliant, again, as with so many musicians, because he knew what not to play. He could play all the notes perfectly. He could do everything. He could extemporize around it. But he allowed that song to breathe, which made it so much more potent.
If Russ Ballard had written the commercial tracks on the first two albums, then Rod Argent and Chris White certainly caught up when they wrote Hold Your Head Up. It was the major track on the third album altogether now, and it's certainly the track that most people remember Argent for.
When the elements of Argent are properly in alignment, the group really cooks, and Hold Your Head Up was one of those moments where it really came together. You've got that wonderful understated rhythm which sets up that nice groove for a great melody over the top, and some excellent and very understated playing from both Russ Ballard and Rod Argent. It's a great moment, well, in the history of rock really. It's one of those all-time classic songs that will never go away.
Argent didn't want hit singles. They were a serious albums band. We're not about having hit singles. We do not want to be on top of the pops or on daytime radio. In fact, it was almost an anathema to them. It was an insult to suggest they might be in that format. They were in the studio doing a third album, and they had a tour booked. There was no music to put out. Their record label, CBS, said, we need to put something out around the tour. So Argent said, well, let's take a couple of the songs, put them together on an EP. And one of the tracks was Hold Your Head Up, a 6-minute epic with a massive organ solo in the middle. So they went on tour, thinking no more about it. Alan Freeman at Radio 1, who had a rock show at the time, picked up on Hold Your Head Up, loved it so much, he played it every single week on his show. And people began to get into this song. So the record label then had this cunning plan. What we'll do is an edited version. We'll cut it by half, cut out all the keyboard playing, we'll make it into a pop song and put it out as a single. So Argent came back from Europe on tour to suddenly find they had a hit single. They weren't very happy about it because it had taken their work, their artistry, and made it commercial by basically cutting it. They'd cannibalised the song.
Rod wasn't at all upset about this, and in fact, he feels that going on top of the pops to promote the song blazed a path for other progressive bands to follow. Suddenly, it was trendy to be on top of the pops. You didn't turn your back on it.
Now, if we break the chords down into the component parts, what you get first of all is you get a D suspended fourth chord to a D major chord. Then you get a C chord to a C suspended second chord. Then you go back to the D. The next chord is a G over a D, and then an A minor with an added 9 to an A minor. And that's the verse. And then the chorus pattern is a D rootin' fifth to an F major, and then a D rootin' fifth to to a B flat major over D, and then a D root in fifth, to an E suspended fourth, to an E major. Musically, it was using chord progressions that were quite unusual for the time. They were musically interesting, they were well thought through, they made musical sense. They weren't just three basic chords, which was the sort of, the three-chord trick, as they used to call it in those days. And it showed that the musicians that were writing it, the composers that were writing it, were listening to all sorts of different styles of music and taking from that style and then putting it out through their own songs. It was great, yeah, very good. Still stands at the test of time today.
Keep On Rolling gave Rod Argent the chance to do a bit of barrel house piano, a bit of the old Jelly Roll Morton that he might have been listening to as a kid. It's an album track that perhaps you wouldn't otherwise have heard had it not been on the back of Hold Your Head Up. But in concert, it gave Rod the chance to really go to town and show people what he could do.
There was so much classy, elegant material that Argent had at their disposal, but we would constantly go back to these silly little disposable pop songs, and Keep On Rolling for me was one of them.
It was about being on the road, it was about keep on going. It had nothing to it that was particularly inspiring or particularly charismatic. It's a good Argent song though. And like good Argent songs, they stand up to the test of time. Again, one of the problems they had was production. If they'd had a better producer involved, it may have been a better song. As it is, it's a good song, but not a great song.
Mama, ooh, where you done? Made me feel so strong. I just wanna love all night long. Ooh, just like a river, boy, like the morning rain. I can't help but love in no way. Keep on rolling, I keep on rolling.
Don't judge Jim Rodford by the plodding bass line of Hold Your Head Up. He was capable of a lot more than that. Also, as a member of the Blue Tones, not the modern group, but a group of the same name, he inspired his cousin Rod Argent to become a pop musician rather than a classical one. Jim was also, and still is, a very capable vocalist. He sings with Rod at the moment in the reformed Zombies, and his vocal contribution was quite vital to reproducing the harmonies that we heard on record on the concert stage.
He obviously was an intelligent bass player. He knew simplicity. He's got two other guys in the band, a keyboard player and a guitar player, who were messing around playing all sorts of chord inversions. They've got all the sweet melody stuff on top. He knew his role in the band was to keep it solid, keep it tight, keep it solid, get a good groove going with Bob Henrit, which he did. They were a great rhythm section. And you couldn't really ask for a better bass player for that band, quite honestly.
Rodford wasn't necessarily a great musician, although he was very sturdy and very steady, but he seemed to be within the band the man who could talk to all sides. He fulfilled a role not dissimilar to John Lord's role in Deep Purple. When he had a clash of identities and characters, he could go and talk to one, get their point of view, go and talk to the other, get their point of view, and explain each point of view so that the band remained together somewhat. So it's more of a diplomatic role than a musicianship role.
Jim Rodford is one of the great unsung heroes on the bass of rock. You only have to listen to, again, God Save Rock and Roll to you is probably a great example of just what he can do, that wonderful melodic baroque sound he brings to that album is a good indicator of just how good a bassist the man actually is.
God gave us rock and roll.
God Gave Rock and Roll to You, that's an interesting anthem because it's slow, it's stately, it's sedate. Most anthems want to get the pulse racing, you want your fist in the air. This was a completely different type of anthem to most of the things we know. Kiss took it 20 years later and made it their own in many respects. But you listen to the original and it's all there.
Rod told me that when Russ Ballard brought it into the studio, it was actually twice the tempo that they eventually ended up recording it. Once they'd settled on a speed, it worked pretty well as a 70s anthem.
They had this little excursion off into the Baroque, which you very rarely hear in rock music, but when it does work, it works magnificently well. That little Baroque theme is what separates it out from the crowd for me.
Now what's quite interesting about this is it's quite Bach-like, Johann Sebastian. That bass movement. It was a benchmark musically in that era for lots of other bands. David Bowie used a similar sort of progression. Mott the Hoople, Ian Hunter's band, used similar progressions. It became an anthemic progression of chords and people would do similar things. So a real benchmark, as I said, and quite an important piece of music.
In Deep was an album when things started to fall apart for Argent. And in all honesty, it could have been so much more than it was.
It's always difficult to follow up your first big hit album, and Argent, having done so well with All Together now, obviously wanted to sustain that success within Deep. I don't think it's an album that fans necessarily feel is their favourite, but it did have some classics on it.
Rod Argent was very much going more progressive. Russ Ballard was much more heavily into pop, and the album's divisions actually are greater than its strengths, and it's such a shame because there is some good stuff on it.
Argent are an underrated band, and In Deep is for me one of the classic albums. It should, if there was any justice, be up there alongside Machine Head and all these other great albums, Close to the Edge, all the albums that came out of the 70s, but it's not. It's very much overlooked, which is a real shame. But on the other hand, if you do take the time to go and dig it out, you'll discover a real gem there.
The potential was there with In Deep, and it could have been so much of a better album. If only they'd had a producer who could have got hold of the two parts and put them together. It would have been a brilliant record.
God gave rock and roll to you, gave rock and roll to you, say rock and roll for everyone. Love your friend, love your neighbor, love your life and love your labor. No, it's never too late to change your mind. Don't step on snails, don't climb in trees. Please don't tease. It's never too late to change your mind.
As a live band, Argent would have considered themselves progressive rather than glam. There were groups like Mott the Hoople who dress up in boots and capes and what have you. Argent didn't really do a lot of that. They really prefer to wow people with their instrumental virtuosity rather than the way they look.
Because they were accomplished musicians and because, as another musician listening to them live, they were touching on classical, touching on jazz, a bit of blues, a bit of soul, a little bit of country here and there. It meant the show was always, for me, very interesting. And because they were quite emotive as a band, I think for someone who was not a musical listener, was just there to see them perform and for the songs or whatever, that it touched them as well. The great thing about them was they managed to project their music from the stage to the audience, to the heart of the audience, either musically or just emotionally. And I think that's the essence of any good live band, and they certainly were a very good live band.
You would get, hopefully, the harmonies that you had on record, but you'd also get extended instrumental breaks. A lot of the songs would almost double in length, which of course if you were into it was great. If you didn't like progressive rock, I'm not quite sure what you were doing at the concert.
Improvisation was what Argent did best. They'd go into a song and then it would open up and everyone went with it, led mostly by Rod Argent, because as I said before, he was the man who wanted to be seen as a serious musician. He was the progressive rocker, but they all went with it and seemed to love doing it. You'd hear them on stage doing minute after minute after minute of jam session and think, these guys are fantastic. You didn't know whether or not anyone in that band knew when that particular jam session was going to end and roll back into the song, but he always had the feeling at the back of his mind, Rod Argent would know the minute when it should happen, in fact the second when it should roll back. That was one of his strengths. Was he loved jamming, he loved extemporising, he loved opening up, but he also had an innate sense of when enough was enough. But that was the strength of Argent live, was the ability to improvise.
The other performers, for instance, on Hammond organ, you know, the Keith Emersons and the John Lords were perhaps more flamboyant performers than Rod. But Rod, yeah, you still cut a figure, shall we say, live.
It's sad to think that sometimes it's only the visuals that people remember.
Rod Argent was something of a little star in his own way. He had a certain charisma, in a similar fashion to Keith Emerson or Rick Wakeman. You think of those two and you think about characters and charisma and personality, and those two were possibly the biggest characters in their bands, respectively. ELP, Stroke Nice, and yes, Rod Argent fulfilled a similar role. Obviously the band was named after him, he put the band together, but he was a good, personable man on stage. However, to some extent, I really wish they had a vocalist as well, someone who really could bring out some of those songs better than Rod Argent or Russ Ballard could. They were good singers, but why settle for good when you can have great? Because you knew that Rod Argent would never settle for good as a keyboard player, and Russ Ballard would never settle for good as a guitarist, so why settle for vocals that weren't as good as they might have been? And I think that to some extent held them back as well.
In the 70s, there were a whole run of really great live albums produced, like Wishbone Ash's Live Dates, Deep Purple's Made in Japan, and Argent Encore is one of those albums. It's absolutely a superb double set. It's, for me, the finest achievement of the band. And at that stage, you could see why they were really exciting crowds. They really had it together in terms of the composition, what they were writing. They were great in the studio because In Deep was a fantastic studio album, so everything was there, and when it did all come together, the band really flew. Sadly, it was only for a very brief time around 73, 74, but at that point they were certainly up there alongside all of the bands at the very top of their profession.
To my way of thinking, Encore is a great live album. It's the best album Argent ever did. It not only had their best songs, but it actually captured what they did best, which was live on stage, when they could open up and be a band and be a progressive rock band and really show off, but show off with a purpose and a focus. And I think one of the reasons why Encore got ignored was because it wasn't particularly pushed by the record company at the time.
It's an excellent live album, and you know, some of the other things they did live, like the whistle test stuff for the BBC and things like that, it's obvious that they're comfortable in a live situation. So I think it probably is underrated by the mere fact that not as many people know about it that should know about it, and you should all go out and buy it.
Encore was recorded in the era long before DVDs, and I think we might have got a little more out of it had we had the visuals to go with the music. Certainly tracks like Hold Your Head Up come out to almost double the length. I think that got an extra synthesizer solo. But if you're trying to extend songs, you have to keep the interest going, and I think without the visuals, sometimes the songs can be stretched a little too far.
Russ Ballard had gone. He wasn't there anymore, and somehow the band had gone into this hazy phase. No one quite knew what was going to happen next, so Encore got lost, and many, many years later, 30 years later, it's still not got any recognition because no one's pulled it out of the archives and said, you know what, listen to this album, put it alongside the great live albums of the 70s, and it stands up well. And not only that, like the great live albums of the 70s, like Live and Dangerous with Thin Lizzy, like Strangers in the Night with UFO, this is probably the best thing the band ever did.
You'll find on Encore two songs that you won't find anywhere else in Argent's recorded repertoire. The first is Time of the Season, which of course was the Zombies' last hit in the States, and the other one is a version of I Don't Believe in Miracles, which was sung by Russ Ballard, who actually wrote the song for Colin Blunstone. Tied up a few loose ends, but Russ was already looking to the future, and that was a solo future.
And I believe that somewhere there's someone who's gonna light the way when things go wrong. The bullet that shot me down was wrong. You're gone. The words that turn me round from your song.
I Don't Believe in Miracles is always a song regarded as being lame-brained. It was on Encore Live, and it was a Russ Ballard song a lot of people thought didn't quite belong in Argent. It was a great song though. The problem was, I don't think Rod Argent himself had much interest in it, so they let Russ Ballard run with it. And Russ Ballard saw it as a slightly softer song. If only, again, the band had arranged it properly, it would have been seen as far more than just a soft rock song. But it's an excellent pop tune, and it's such a shame it doesn't get the respect it deserves.
While it didn't really have the guts that one would know as Argent, it certainly threw back to the Zombies. And it's interesting that in 2004, the reformed Zombies released an album called As Far As I Can See, which recut the song with Rod and Colin both present.
Is it too wimpy? I think it's more pop, and I think it's more in the David Essex genre than what you'd expect from Argent. It's not a bad song. I don't think they released a bad song at all. It's definitely more pop orientated than rock orientated, and essentially Argent were a rock band.
As a whole, I think Argent are criminally underrated. I think in Encore, they produced one of the best live albums of the 70s. In Deep was one of the best studio albums of the 70s. And God Gave Rock and Roll to You is one of the greatest singles of the 70s. They did produce some fantastic work, and I think they are criminally underrated.
Argent are inevitably underrated because they didn't have the huge success and longevity of Yes or Genesis. Their glory period, if you want to put it into that context, is 3 or 4 years. And then Ballard left. They brought in John Verity and the late John Grimaldi, and the band just lost any spark it had. It went on too long, and Rod Argent himself has now said, I should have ended it when Russ Ballard left. If only I thought of that.
The Argent catalogue belongs to CBS Sony. Now, obviously, being a big American company, Argent to them is just a drop in the ocean, and they haven't yet released anything like a definitive anthology. Perhaps if Argent himself could get his hands on the recordings, we'd get something that was worthy of their legacy.
You think of the great progressive bands, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, King Crimson, Yes, Genesis. They're the ones you always think of. But Argent had the potential to be up there with all of them, because of the individuals had so much ability. There was no better songwriter in any of those bands than Russ Ballard. There was no better keyboard player in any of those bands than Rod Argent. There was no better rhythm section than Jim Rodford and Bob Henrit. They had what it took to be right up there. The problem was, in the studio, they never made an album that really fulfilled what they were capable of.
It's been great for me to actually delve back into, the chest of songs and albums, because it's. Well, I think somebody should redo Hold Your Head Up, maybe I will, There's lots of great material there and lots of great performances. They should be very proud of what they did.
And if they shout, don't let it change that thing that you do. of summer ways, loving nights lately. When we share always loving nights lately. I would love to make you happy. I would surely try. But you feel you must be free, so seize your love, see goodbye, and I won't be your stepping stone. No, I won't be your stepping stone. No, I won't be your stepping stone. No, I won't be your stepping stone. I won't ever leave while you want me to stay. Nothing you could do could turn me away. Hanging on every word, believing the things I heard, being a fool. You've taken my life, so take my soul. That's what you said, and I believed it all. I wanna be with you, long as you want me to. I won't move away. That what you said? Ain't that what you said? Ain't that what you said? Bye. 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 What you said